My name is Damien Saunder, and I'm going to share with you a hobby project that got so wonderfully and spectacularly out of control. It's about the influence that maps have had on album cover design. It all started here at the Arts Centre in Pasadena. I was studying a typography course, and the lecturer said to us in the class, if you want any inspiration for this project that you have ahead of you, go think of album covers. Go look at album covers for a source of inspiration. Not only for typography, photography, style, composition, design, over a period of about 85 years. And so I did. And what became of that was an obsessive crate digger and vinyl addict. I would start at garage sales, record stores, and of course I would live here in Discogs, where they have over 50 million musical artefacts. Not all of them are vinyl, some are CDs, cassettes and other forms. And there was a moment during the project that I was working on typography that I thought, I wonder what influence maps have had on album cover design. 10 years later, well, before that, I would stumble across this in a milk crate in Melbourne. This was the first of many that I would collect. This is the Dave Brubeck Quartet from 1957, the first 12-inch to ever feature a map on it. Arnold Roth, a legendary New York illustrator, would take this piece on through a shared connection with Dave Brubeck and his quartet. Arnold, who is 93 now, would share an hour with me on a phone call many years ago and share his experience and love for maps in his work that he would do. And he never knew he was the first, even though he's a much celebrated and documented artist, that he was the first person to put a map on a 12-inch record. But he wasn't the first. This is what I believe to be the first 10-inch record that would ever feature a map on it, from 1939. It's a folk music from Ireland by Pat Harrington. Very simple piece, but no better way to enforce the music that was within the album other than by putting a map on it. 10 years later, the obsession grew very, very quickly out of control. 600 records plus, and the project, which is titled Maps on Vinyl, would include 415 of these. Like everyone, COVID gave us a time for reflection, and this is Melbourne. And in Australia, we suffered some very, very harsh restrictions about what we could and couldn't do. So there were pretty lonely times, and there were some pretty isolated and desolate streets. And I was sitting there one time and I thought, I wonder if I should ever do something with this record collection that I now have. And so I did. And I started reaching out to all of the sleeve designers, the artists, the musicians, the record labels, families sometimes if they were in charge of the estate. And I simply said to them, you have this. You have a body of music, you need to create some artwork. You have a square blank canvas. And there are a bunch of design elements at which you could have chosen to put on that cover. Those are a photograph. Here we are, famous image from Pink Floyd with a photoshopped pig that got away on the loose. This beautiful painting or portrait of Lord, so an illustration or a painting is another option for a sleeve designer. Of course, just a very simple, or not, sometimes brilliant typographic treatment here that we see on the Sex Pistols album. Or of course you could throw that all out and just do something really abstract just with shapes and colours. So if you think about the elements of design, we've seen sort of 4 of them here. But what we often saw was this. So maps were used as an element of design, sometimes wholly, or sometimes only as part of the album cover. And I asked the simple question, why? You had all these other elements of design to choose from, but you chose a map. What link did the map have to the music, to the narrative, to the artist, to maybe the agenda, either politically or socially, that the musician was trying to tell? And broadly speaking, here's what they told me. Like much of us in the room, they love the cartographic design system. They had a keen interest in the visual dynamic that maps offer. And then finally, a map was often the perfect canvas to illustrate the themes and the narratives that would play out on the record. But it got deeper than that. There were many, many, many issues that have played out over the last 85 years that unfortunately still many exist today that have featured on the covers of these works, and a map has either emphasised or illustrated that point. Here we are, a melting pot of cultures. This is a Montreal artist, when I say artist, musician, and they were illustrating the point here of Montreal being a melting pot of cultures. We would move on to very important topics like an acknowledgement of country, and there are some beautiful Indigenous examples in the atlas. Topics that we see today, way back when in 1984, gender stereotyping and flying into the gap, and what better way than to use a globe, and on the rear of that they would use colours of pinks and blues to sort of break down that stereotyping between men and women across those two different colours. Africa. Unfortunately for a lot of us, we've almost forgotten about some of the challenges that are still faced within some of the places and countries within Africa. Famine, education, health and geopolitics. The only place in the atlas that gets its own chapter because of its importance and how frequently it came up within the work. And here, a really powerful cover, right? The shape of Africa is used as a motif for someone's face here, with a tear dropping down and looking deeply out, wondering if there is ever going to be any hope for this continent. Some of us might feel like doing this some days. Head to the rocket and let's get the hell out of here, right? So this is what's happening. Human love is lost, and they're all racing towards the base of the rocket to leave planet Earth. These folks were ahead of their time. This is a picture disc, so this is a split record between two German bands, 219, and they imagined a world if you took away all of the ice pack. And I see so there's some beautiful Antarctica work down in the gallery today and yesterday, and this is a great example of if you were to take all away all of the ice, this would be what was left in Antarctica. Of course, industrialisation, one of my favourite covers, just being the world just being pulled apart and sucked apart by a myriad and a complex network of pipes. And there's a number of really great Easter eggs within this cover that illustrate the effect that industrialisation has had. Land rights, home ownership, asylum seekers, refugees on this beautiful piece, an Indigenous artist from Australia by Ben McEwen, one of my favourites. This is for a band called The Basics. And of course, no collection of work, particularly with America being such a huge player in the music space. This cover, which is all about the current administration of that country, and all I will probably say is those three words say it all. It's not all doom and gloom. Many, many years ago, my family and I would head to California, much like Mary Schultz did, who was a Philadelphia native. And she was searching for the endless opportunities that California would offer. And so this beautiful painting by Mary herself left the horizon or the coastline of California unfinished, because her business there was always unfinished, and it presented a number of endless opportunities for her. Gets a little crazy sometimes, so these folks, this is Rosa Parks, they describe this body of work as a earthboundish Super Nintendo style map. It has a backside of this which completes sort of the picture of this otherworldly city, and some of the music on here matches some of the themes that play out on this record. What I found out was, in this collection that I had, there was 103 identifiable places across the world. All from the Faroes in the north, to the Falklands in the south, across to New Zealand and the Cook Islands, and anywhere in between. The size of these circles represent the number of times that place features in the atlas. So Africa featuring about 30 times. Obviously UK and Europe very popular, California and America, and then everywhere in between. The timeline here shows the rise and fall of vinyl records over time. Every dot on this timeline is one example of that time period in the book. So you can see here 1939 was that work from Ireland, and we can see a vinyl boom through here, CDs come in, electronic music, but now we're seeing vinyl peak again. So the collection of records in the book mimics really what has happened to this format over time. There are an endless number of map types that I came across. Of course, starting with tube maps and the way in which people have used them to represent this in case is a live record by Nicol Williamson from 1975. This is what they call a skull map. So this became famous for the Life and the Times. Again, this is a double. So it's a compilation or a collage of old antique maps that have been come together to make the skull map as it became known. Of course, there's topographic maps. Martha and the Muffins, Echo Beach, everyone might know that song. Well, the single also had a map on it by Peter Saville. And Peter's been a great supporter of the project. We chatted for a long time about his love for maps. Obviously, he's a pretty significant name in the music industry and the design industry. And he was responsible for putting in this 1 to 25,000 Canadian topographic map, which represents, not surprisingly, where Martha and the Muffins are from. There's some beautiful pictorial maps throughout the atlas from places all over the world. This one here in Ukraine, this is a single, a vinyl single, and a very simple pictorial maps which shows all the places of interest in this particular part of the world. And of course the shapes, like we've seen with Africa, we see the shapes being used in really innovative ways. This is like a cookie cutter, and you'll notice here that this shape of Israel was during a period of time after the 7-Day War and the extent of which they controlled after that. And of course, globes would feature heavily, Rufus de Sol's debut album, and of course there were some technical aspects of the maps. This here, a 24-hour orbital satellite map. Of course, Atlas would feature about 5 times in the Atlas, this one on a 12-inch by a band called Glory. Some of the techniques used here by a Belgian tattoo artist, pen and ink, skateboard by Mark Harfield, who was an expert in this area, and the band loved his work. Paste up, go and grab a newspaper cutting from the Melbourne Age, and a weekly newspaper, and then go and grab some other pieces and put them all together. Very hand drawn approaches. Watercolour here, in a 1980 record of an illustration of Brazil. Origami, another one of my favourites, a beautiful piece on the Gardens of God Zulu record. And of course, for some of you who may remember, I certainly don't, it was before my time, but Martin was telling me when he was producing this piece, he went and invested in early 1980s $20,000 on one of these state-of-the-art sort of Photoshop manipulation programs, which was the first application to be controlled by a stylus. And of course, who wouldn't love some classic late 70s airbrush work? This is an illustration of playing the game. If you're going to be successful in the music world, then you need to play the game, and the band wanted to illustrate a checkerboard approach with, you know, dice and other objects that would play and play out during their time as a band. As I said earlier, there were some big names. So Peter Saville, probably most people would know, the Joy Division Unknown Pleasure record he was responsible for. Factory Records he was with for many, many years. His work features 3 times throughout the book. Stanley Mouse and Alton Kelly, they were responsible for the Grateful Dead's branding and their whole sort of Deadhead theme that they've become a part of that group. Pedro Bell, if you haven't seen some of Pedro's work, sort of Afro-futuristic work for Funkadelic, which is still brilliant today, and it has so many Easter eggs within his work, some of which are related to maps. And then, of course, Neville Garrick, who for a long time was joined at the hips with Bob Marley and will be responsible for photographing and building his image and brand and art over the time. So there was some headline acts in terms of the design world. There was also some pretty big players who had chosen to use maps on their album covers. From bands of today, Oasis and Coldplay, to the Grateful Dead, Brandy Clark, Depeche Mode, Madonna, Rufus Du Sol, and basically everyone in between. So it was a who's who of bands and artists over time. So what was this project? Well, it was definitely a one-of-a-kind book. There haven't been too many, if any, long-term projects that have looked into the influence that maps have had on album cover design. I ended up writing 32,000 words on it. There was 415 records that eventually made the atlas and spread across 8 chapters. Every theme of each chapter represents the types of maps that exist in it. It certainly does do this, which was one of the goals. I wanted to explore the role that maps played in album cover design since 1939. And I'd always wanted to do something about the role that music, geography played in music, and I could never really find out what it was, but I think this starts to look at the role that geography plays in the creation of music. 2 other goals that I had was I hope that sleeve designers continue to use maps as a design element because many of the examples in this book are simply brilliant. And I would also like to see this more. So if you look up the elements of design in literature and indoor design books, maps are never considered as a design element, but clearly this book shows that they are an element of design which should be considered, particularly for bodies of work like this. And I hope for all of you in the room, it emboldens you to explore and see ways in which non-cartographers mostly have used maps in really innovative and creative and artistic ways to complement either the narrative or the story that was being told throughout the music. And with that, almost to the minute, I will leave you with that and take any questions.